Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Ruby Lena. I'm owner to Bome Sapphire Shop. This is what I look like. Before you get into watching the video, like my packaging and all that, I just wanted to explain why I started my YouTube channel and why it's me making chokers and then packaging them, and why it's true crime. So yeah, so the reason why I started is because I need to get more self publicity out for my shop. My shop is currently not doing so hot, mostly because I don't have my website. I am running out of marketing ideas, so I'm hoping this helps. So yeah, the reason why it's called Murder Chokers is because, well, it's because of a few reasons. It's because I still absolutely love making chokers and I love doing that for my business. Second is, I want to be a homicide detective in the homicide department, in the police thing, whatever it's called, sorry. So hence the true crime with me packaging and making orders. So yeah, before you guys watch this video, please like, please share, and it'd be glorious if you subscribed. I'd be so thankful. Also, I do have commissions and I do have trades and collabs open if anybody's interested. That goes for everyone and all small shops, but without further ado, please enjoy. Alrighty everyone, hi. So I'm gonna do a little disclaimer before we get started, and that is if you are squeamish to gory details, I suggest you not watch this video because this case has a lot of gory details and a lot of trigger warnings that include rape and such. So yeah, there's your disclaimer, and now let's get into the Black Dahlia case. Alrighty. At 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947, Betty Bersinger was taking her daughter, 3-year-old Anne, out to run an errand near what is now the Crenshaw neighborhood of LA. As they passed an empty lot on Norton Avenue, Miss Betty told officials, "I glanced to my right and saw this very dead white body. My goodness, it was so white it didn't look like anything more than perhaps an artificial model. It was so white and separated in the middle." End quote. It was the body of Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, who was laying face up and naked, her body cut in half at the waist. She was oddly posed, her eyes open, hands above her head with elbows bent and legs straight and spread apart. She had been hit over the head and pieces of her flesh had been cut out of the corners of her mouth. Where 3-inch long slits, with how gory the scene was, no blood was there. It had seemed the body had been drained and scrubbed before it had been placed. Oof. Miss Betty quickly went to a nearby home to call the police and report the body. Betty then continued to run her errand. I would need to go home after seeing that? Like, why would you continue running your errand? Anyway, back to the case. Alrighty, so at the time, it was common for newspapers to give murder cases nicknames. The papers called her the Black Dahlia. Due to reports, she always wore sleek black clothing and had dyed black hair. The autopsy report of Elizabeth Short showed how horrifying her last moments were. Short died of hemorrhage and shock. Marks on her legs, wrists, neck, and right thigh suggests that she was tied down and tortured. The slits at the corners of her mouth were made while she was still alive. She also suffered a concussion from multiple blows to her head. After LAPD and help from the FBI identified the body, the LAPD started putting flyers up to get more info on Elizabeth. It described her as 5'6", 118 pounds, black hair, green eyes, very attractive, bad lower teeth, fingernails chewed too quick. Eventually, more info on Elizabeth was found. She was originally from Medford, Massachusetts. She eventually moved to Hollywood, some say in the hopes of stardom. Like a lot of actresses, she worked as a waitress and a cashier, and dealt with periods of unemployment as she struggled with getting minor acting roles. Reports say that the cuts were clean, raising suspicion early on that it was someone with surgical skills may have committed the murder. The gory details and the glamour of Hollywood caused Elizabeth's murder to become a huge story. On newspaper, page 1 headlines for an entire month beating the sensation was the apparent murderer themselves. 9 days after her body was found, an envelope with some of her belongings in it, including her social security card, birth certificate, pictures, and an address book that was missing pages. All of the items had been cleaned of any fingerprints using gasoline, and the envelope had been addressed using cutout letters taken from movie advertisement. All told, 13 letters were sent to the police and press, taunting them as the investigation unfolded. Many signed Black Dahlia Avenger. There were many suspects throughout the investigation. It's been estimated there were hundreds investigated and cleared. The police contacted about 75 men listed in the address book. That was sent to the LA Examiner. The majority of them said they'd met Elizabeth only briefly, going out on a dinner date or to the movies, but that things had ended before they went any further. During the case, the FBI investigated around 300 USC medical students, though it seems nothing came of this. At one point, fingerprints were found on one of the Dahlia letters sent to the police. The FBI raced to match these prints with an identity, but the fingerprints weren't in the files, so they were unable to find a match. Eventually, the case went cold. So that is all I know of the details of the case. We are going to look at one suspect, and that is Dr. George Hodel. I personally do believe that he did commit murder, and many others. But yeah, so we're going to start talking about that. Alrighty, Dr. George Hodel. Many who worked on the case over the years believe they interacted with the real killer. At some point, perhaps no one feels stronger than Steve Hodel. After retiring as a LAPD homicide detective, having worked on over 300 murder cases, Steve published his research claiming the murderer was George Hodel, the detective's own father. George Hodel was a wealthy doctor in LA, described as a well-connected, dashing man. With a high IQ, George was in charge of a venereal disease clinic in LA, which supposedly gave him knowledge of the sexual lives of people ranging from local sex workers to the city's elite. While George wasn't a practicing surgeon, he was reported to have breezed through medical school, where he studied to be one. After George Hodel's death, his son Steve found two photos of a woman who Steve believed to be Elizabeth, the Black Dahlia. He began investigating, coming to believe that his father had a romantic relationship with Elizabeth and that they had been spotted together at a hotel in downtown LA. George would have had the medical training needed to produce the surgical mutilation performed on Elizabeth's body, and that is only the beginning. Steve has suggested that George is also responsible for Jean French's murder, which occurred a mere 3 short weeks after Elizabeth's on February 10th. Like Elizabeth, Jean received blunt force trauma to the head, and her body was also found oddly posed in a vacant lot early one morning. Jean's body bore the initials BD, possibly thought to stand for Black Dahlia. Written in her red lipstick, notes allegedly sent by the killer after the murder matched George's handwriting, according to handwriting analysis performed by the forensic expert hired by Steve Hodel. That expert does believe that the BD initials written on Jean French's body matched George's handwriting. Evidence was found that George had 50-pound sacks of concrete sent to his home for remodeling on January 9th, 1947. The last day Short was seen alive and less than 1 week before her body was found. George's son has claimed that there were similar bags found near Elizabeth's body that police speculated could have been used to carry Elizabeth's body from the car to the lot. What's more is George drove a black 1936 Packard that looked similar to the descriptions of a black car seen down near the empty lot where Elizabeth's body had been found. Steve's research pointed out similarities between how Elizabeth's body was found and work by George's reported friend, surrealist artist Man Ray. The Black Dahlia's arms were posed above her head, not unlike Man Ray's photographs possessed by MoMA Minotaur. As for the slits on Elizabeth's mouth, they could have been inspired by the artist's painting Observatory Time the Lovers. According to Steve, George idolized Man Ray and wanted to be an artist himself. Could the Black Dahlia have been George's sick attempt at art? That's horrible. One of George's daughters, Tamar Hodel, recalled her father hosting huge parties at their Hollywood adjacent home with guests including Man Ray as well as movie stars. Alrighty. Tamar also claimed she had posed for Man Ray nude when she was a child. After running away from home in 1949, Tamar reported her father to police, telling them he had tried to teach her about oral sex at the age of 11, that he had offered her to his friends for sex when she was 14, and that George himself had had sex with her. As a side note, at age 15, Tamar gave birth to a baby girl in San Francisco. That girl, Fauna Hodel, would be adopted by a family in Nevada and not know the story of her biological father and grandfather until much later, conducting research of her own. Oh, that had to be rough. Okay. George was ultimately acquitted of incest charges after several other family members testified that Tamar was lying. There are those who have stated, however, that the family could have motivated to do so because George was the breadwinner supporting the family. That's still horrible, though. Anyway, continue on. In 1950, a few years after the Black Dahlia murder, George moved, or perhaps fled, to the Philippines. Perhaps not so coincidentally, a woman murdered in Manila in 1967 reportedly was also found bisected and posed in an empty lot, just like Elizabeth. Steve claims that at the time George was living just a half mile away from the crime scene. In 2012, Steve visited his childhood home with a production crew, another former police officer, and a search dog that picked up the scent of human of human decomposition in multiple locations on the property, such as the alleyway in the back of the house, according to Dr. Arpad Vass, a leading forensic anthropologist who helped pioneer chemical analysis of human decomposition. This does not technically indicate where the search dog found the scents, because the markers the dog detects can move, carried by water and other forces over the decades. However, Vass himself analyzed a soil sample taken from the alley behind the home and found that it was positive for human remains. Though this sample indicated a death had occurred anywhere from 20 to 100 years ago. After hearing about the George Hodel theory, LA Times reporter Steve Lopez went to the LA DA and was given access to case files and grand jury documents. In the files, he found a photo of George listing him among 21 other suspects. Lopez also found records indicating that the LAPD had snuck listening devices into George's home, undetected, and listened to George for 40 days in 1950, not long before he left for the Philippines. The recording do not exist anymore, but transcripts of the recordings were left in the DA's files. Lopez says one of the transcripts had recorded George saying, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't contact my secretary because she's dead." End quote. Another transcript describes what may have been the sound of a woman being attacked in the basement of the home. According to a CBS 48-hour special on the case, the investigation into George's possible ties to Elizabeth was shut down abruptly in 1950, with one of the lead investigators stating that the recordings taken from George's home eliminated him as a suspect. If that doesn't sound right to you, you're not alone. George's son claims his father, via his connections and occupation, had knowledge about corruption in the LAPD and their ties to prostitution and abortion rings, and that the police covered up George's guilt to avoid their own dirty laundry being aired. Indeed, some officers in LAPD notoriously were corrupt in the early 20th century, and the transcripts from the bugs left in George's house also reportedly quote George saying, "This is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies. I'd like to get a connection made in the DA's office," end quote. Blending credibility to the corruption allegations, according to the 48 Hours investigation, the LAPD admits that much of the physical evidence for the Black Dahlia case is not with the files. It's unclear where it is or why it would be missing, while there are some doubts as to whether the photos found in George's photo album are actually of Elizabeth, or if his handwriting does match the letters sent to the police and press. There's enough cause for suspicion without those leads to keep the lens focused on George Hodel. After reviewing the Hodel case, Stephen Kay, the then LA County head deputy DA who had prosecuted murder cases for 35 years, stated he believed more than the case had been solved, speaking for himself, not the DA's office. Quote, "I would have no reservations about filing 2 counts of murder against Dr. George Hodel." Freaking good. George returned to the US from the Philippines around 1990. He died in 1991 at the age of 91. To this day, the case is still open, but it has been decades since authorities were actively investigating. Perhaps most frustrating is the sentiment by John Douglas, former head of the FBI's Serial Crimes Division and one of the nation's leading experts on profiling violent crimes. Douglas knows that so much information can be ascertained from the murder's interactions and time he spent with the body that, quote, the crime would be very solvable. The Black Dahlia murder riveted the nation and continues to fascinate people today. Was the Black Dahlia merely the most infamous murder at the hands of Dr. George Hodel? I personally think so. So, yeah. That is all I have on the Black Dahlia case, and I'm gonna go over a few things before I end this. First thing being, I am probably gonna try to only do these type of videos once every 2 weeks. Once a week to every 2 weeks. Within that time, I will be posting other content such as things related to books, jewelry, my business, and maybe makeup, but probably not really, because I'm not really that much of a makeup person. But yeah. My next video is probably going to be a jewelry collection video. If you guys have any preference, please leave it down below in the comments. And yeah, this case is a horrible case, and I do believe that George Hodel was a serial killer and committed many more crimes than the ones that were mentioned in this case. And I'm just disgusted by the LAPD that they let him go free because he was gonna air out their dirty laundry. I'm gonna rant about this for a while. Anyway, you guys have a great rest of your day and a great summer, and I hope you guys like the video and how I present the cases and such. I will say real quick that I do have my website back up, and it will be linked in the description below if you guys want to check it out. But without that, again, please like and subscribe. It would be highly appreciated, and you guys please enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you.